We're here with Ramesh Srinivasan, the brilliant scholar and perhaps futurist, I believe.
In my own way, sure.
You've been to the Web Summit. Tell us a little bit about your experience here today.
Oh, it's been great. I mean, it's been overstimulating because there's so many people here. But I had the opportunity to share my thoughts in a keynote earlier today, where I discussed technologies of all kinds, but especially digital technologies and their relationships to the questions of the planet, right? Like I focused a lot on the economic issues associated with this digital takeover that we've seen, just in our lives. I discussed artificial intelligence and its history and how different it is than this current model. And I talked about how critical it is for us to think about technologies and more generally how we live in ways that lift all of us up rather than continue to be placed in these bubbles where we are anxious and we don't really know what's going on and we feel very confused about things. And I sort of made the point at the end of the talk, like, are we Googling or being Googled? Yes, the answer is both. Are we socializing on Instagram or being socialized? Well, the answer is both. But the problem is the nature of that ledger is not one that we have a lot of transparency around or power around. So instead, I challenge us to think about how technologies of all kinds can be good for businesses, but not in a way that's zero sum, that supports like a couple investors and the rest of us are sort of almost like in a new feudal class.
That's very interesting because we've been coming from an age of industrialization of systems.
Absolutely.
But now with AI, like you mentioned, I think there is a shift now. And I believe your concern goes into that aspect exactly. How do you see it going in the future?
Look, artificial intelligence systems can be many different things. What we call AI could be like many different types of birds, A lot of AI systems in the past were about logic and rationality and try to apply that to building a system. Or some other systems in the past were focused on specific domains like vision or chess, or like, some other, like we call that specialized AI. Now, these large language model systems, those have taken over our definition of AI, but they don't operate with any sort of logical proposition or domain knowledge. They mimic patterns using stochastic modeling, which is basically just probabilistic and correlation. So they kind of are like, okay, if Ramesh says to GPT or any other system, blah, 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 oh, likely this will be a good response. And the reason they're able to do that is because of the backdrop of them having astronomical amounts of our data, right? So that means, and we see that again and again and again, we saw that with social media as well, that all of these platforms are not worth anything.
So you're talking about regulation?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I just think that the economic issues associated with private corporations that are valuation centered, that use our personal data and use an internet that all of us, at least Americans, paid for, right? There's no Amazon without the internet. There's no internet without American taxpayer investment. That's how the internet started. We paid for it. Like the ARPANET, the early internet. It's like 50 plus years ago. There's no Amazon Prime delivery vehicles without roads. Taxpayers paid for those roads. There's no large language models having any relevance at all without our personal data. It's our personal data. So that means that's not to diminish the value of the services these guys have provided, but recognize that it rests on the backdrop of us. And if they are more and more creating models that are terrible for working in middle classes, then they themselves are contributing to problems that actually are going to cost them too. Because if their model rests upon the value of our data and we all become worthless, then that's a problem. So what I discussed today were a bunch of different approaches. Universal basic income, that was one approach. Paying people for their data, micropayments, that was another approach. Portable benefits were different gig employers, because in the US we don't have guaranteed health insurance, as you probably know.
Yeah.
So like, I drive 10 hours for Uber, 20 hours for Postmates, 10 hours for someone else. They all together help pay for my health insurance. Or identifying jobs of the future, like data ethicist, or archivist, because we're forgetting about history, or cultural information designer. Like there's a lot of new jobs that will emerge with AI systems and with technology systems.
So do you think job displacement is not going to be a concern?
It is a concern if we don't think about what work of the future will look like. But I don't think it's simply about work. It's about it's about economic security of the future, right? So I don't think inherently that regulation itself, I do think that that's critical, but even if that doesn't occur from policymakers, because we have a lot of problems in the US at least with agreement and consensus by our politicians, we can also push corporations to investigate and experiment with these issues, but also it's journalists like yourself who have to call attention to these issues so there can be more pressure so that we do these things. And then there's also the thing that's always changed societies over history, which are social movements. You know, I mean, they're like movements, protests, revolutions. You know, these things also, I'm not saying we revolt against AI, but I'm saying that there's power in populism in challenging these things.
Do you think the economy is going to be able to evolve into this new scenario, or do we need the governments to step in with UBI? I'm not saying that UBI is coming from governments, but do you think it might be? Yeah. But do you think we need governments to step into this issue? Yeah,
I mean, I think that at the end of the day, it sort of fits a common trend that occurs, which is technologies emerge, everyone's like, whoa, what's going on? There's hype and there's collapse, and there's always anxiety and there's some euphoria, right? But some of those things are actually don't have any. Like, what about Clubhouse? Like, what happened to that? Everyone was obsessed with Clubhouse. It was like the coolest thing ever. And then it just, during the pandemic, and then it just disappeared, right? What about the NFT thing? So what we want to do is have a longer view where we don't just get like overwhelmed and our entire mind consumed by like whatever the latest and greatest technology is. And so the way we deal with this is we have to think first and foremost about human beings and about our economic security. And then we just sort of have to look openly at who's going to assist us in making those changes happen. And obviously, that could involve governments. The reason I was late to, in your question, to address governments is because at least in the United States, our government hasn't done a lot on these issues. But in other parts of the world, it has. In Brazil, there's been examples. In the EU, there's been examples. So, I mean, those are other ways to innovate, is sort of like, think about, I was just speaking with the Bulgarian Minister of Technology who requested a meeting with me, and she's thinking big time about all these questions of where things will go in the future, and it was fantastic to speak with her. I was like, oh wow, you're like a leader who's already thinking about these things. So what we need to do as humans is ask a couple of questions. First of all, what kind of society we want to live in? 2, how do we make sure economic security exists for everybody? And then 3, create those policies and those possibilities for everybody. So in a way, what we want to do is reverse engineer from a desired outcome, right? And so then we can think about who is an example of that world we want to live in. Maybe we have to look at science fiction for that, Isaac Asimov, or maybe we have to look at like movies, Elysium, or we want to look at, or we can look at, you know, as the minister said yesterday, the Portuguese minister said, do we want to live in a Star Trek world or in the Matrix, right? So we have opportunities to look at examples, look widely. When I spoke earlier today, I gave a lot of examples of entrepreneurialism from Africa, where these people have no investment, no economic security, yet they're creating all sorts of value out of waste.
How do you see the difference between the United States, so you're in America, between the United States and Europe in terms of all this UBI and everything and AI going forward?
Yeah.
Do you see a big difference because we have Asia too that's taking great steps towards it?
Sure.
How do you see Europe in this particular?
I actually think, even though in Europe I often hear from, you know, my European friends that they feel behind, or like this is all being dominated by the US and China. Like, I just remind you all that like having great policies that support your populations is innovation. And if anything, like, we look up to you all, or at least I do. You know, I have a bunch of friends in EU Parliament too who do really good work, you know, on these topics. I also want to remind you all that like the web comes from Europe. It doesn't come from the US, and it doesn't come from China. It was invented at CERN in the Tim Berners-Lee and all this, right? And so I actually think how Europe wishes to position itself in relation to what's occurring in China, which is, state, corporate, in lockstep with one another, and incredible technologies, but also built upon a fairly authoritarian, surveillance-driven kind of model. Or the US, which has great entrepreneurialism, but is a kind of a messy, polarized country. I think Europe can be a whole other thing, what it stands for. And so, I think that Europe can lead the way with a lot of this. Europe can lead the way in illustrating what a balanced digital world can look like. And then we in the US can look to Europe for some answers. I mean, maybe I'm saying this with some optimism, but what else do we have, right?
I consider you a futurist. This is a personal opinion of mine.
Yeah,
sure. Tell us about how do you see in 2024, how do you see AI evolving? We have these great LLMs working, we have ChatGPT, we have Elon Musk doing its own thing. How do you see it evolving?
Yeah, I mean, look, those models, the large language models, are going to be better and better at simulating and approximating human activity and human expression, because the more data they get and the more refinement they create to the algorithms and the neural networks that they use, the more convincing it will be. So we are reaching a point where these AI systems will behave in a way that will be almost indistinguishable, where you can't tell the difference between it and a human being, which is the so-called Turing test, which was the classic test developed by the British mathematician Alan Turing to describe whether an AI is intelligent or not. However, these AI systems do not work like human beings do on any level at all. As human beings, we're capable of emotion, we're capable of irrationality,
is that an advantage? Or
I think it's totally an advantage, because I think as human beings, we have care, which these AI systems can never have, and we have creativity. So while these systems almost look like that, but they don't process things at all in the same way we do.
Can they evolve into becoming?
No, I don't think so. And I think that whole thing, which people like Musk and other people, Yuval Harari and others are talking about, is a certain kind of what I call the Terminator scenario, and I think it's alarmist, and I think it doesn't give us anything to work with, and I think it also shields these corporations from being actually responsible to workers, to consumers, to the wider public, to ensuring that their algorithmic systems are not racist, that they're not violent against minorities, that they're not discriminatory, right? Like I said. So I don't think it's evolve. I think it's that as we build more and more sophisticated technologies and they capture more and more of our data, which we should all be compensated for, in my opinion, in some way or the other, they're gonna pose more and more as human-like. But the way we work as humans, like I said earlier, is we reason, we use semantics, and we use our emotions, and we're sometimes irrational. And so, by the way, are other forms of life. I said this earlier, like orcas have adapted now to surround fossil fuel ships and attack them like it's crazy. Or birds have what we call collective intelligence. Rhizomes grow underneath the Earth's surface to allow roots to communicate with one another below the forest floor using fungi. There's other forms of organic biological intelligence, and these systems are merely using correlation and pattern recognition with incredible amounts of data and incredibly sophisticatedly fast computing and really smart algorithms to actually mimic human expression. So I'm not trying to trash the systems, I'm just explaining that we should look at them for what they are, rather than get all weird hypey and sort of say it's turning into Frankenstein or Terminator or whatever example you want to use, Blade Runner, So I actually think here's an opportunity. This is what I said in my talk today. We have a huge opportunity to double down on what it means to be human. And I actually think we have a huge opportunity to double down on the question of what it means to be alive. At this time, we on the only planet we've ever known. And so as we see challenges like climate crisis, in my opinion, inequalities around the world, more and more polarization. I want to ask us all a question, which is how do we think about technologies to serve and support overcoming those challenges? And can our business community show leadership and show like a type of integrity and a type of leadership that actually tackles those challenges? So like I can see ways in which AI systems can be huge forms of help with climate change. They can help us predict potentially extreme weather events. They can help us manage resources more intelligently. So these systems will be part of our lives, as they should be, but they can only be part of our lives. And in the meantime, we need to remember what it means to be human.
In one sentence, what are the next steps for governments, companies, businesses, and people?
I think the next step is there needs to be more and more public literacy around what exactly is going on with these systems, including these AIs, LLM, large language model systems. I think that's the first step, is democratization of literacy and understanding about what this is that's going on. I think the government has a role in ensuring that there should be public education campaigns around this. Just like STEM education, we should have education around system literacy. That's the first thing. I think in the meantime, we need to push more and more toward various types of regulatory actions, and we need journalists like you to make sure that that the public is exposed and there's pressure put on these private corporations to do the right thing. I think it's very troubling when you see Microsoft invest a lot of money into OpenAI, and then within, I think, just a few days, cutting thousands of jobs. I'm not saying they did the two things with one another, but it says something, right? It expresses something. And so, the private corporations are going to follow their valuation no matter what, but at the same time, the rest of us have to check that power and make sure we have a more balanced world. And I think that's what the EU can lead on. I hope you all lead on this.
Always amazing talking with you. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Nice to meet you. Thank you.